Selwyn here from winstrength.com, bringing you the third day of the 7th week of the Darkhorse training program by Brian Alsruhe. Like usual, I'll leave links below for Brian Alsruhe's original video where he outlines the program and goes into the details about what to do and all the exercise and whatnot, as well as the great free resource, the Lift Vault website, where they've actually taken that information, placed it on a free Google Sheet so you can do the program by yourself without having to worry about converting all that information from the video into a useful spreadsheet. So here we go. Like usual, the third day back of the third phase brings in a couple of new movements. We did have to change a couple of movements there. The original program asks for some lying leg curls and I think a leg press or something like that. I wanted to do something other than that because, as you can see, I don't have any material of that nature. So we swapped out the first movement to a front squat. The reason I did this was because it is one of my weak points. The front squat is relatively weak compared to the rest of my lifts. So I figured I would throw that in there so that we can get a bit more practice with it, a bit more reps in, because The Obstacle is the Way, great book by Ryan Holiday. Where you find your weaknesses, that's kind of where you want to push forward a little bit. Obviously, play to your strengths, develop those as well, but don't ignore the weaknesses. You don't want to have glaring holes in your strength development there. So if you're good at the back squat, but your front squat isn't as good as the front, maybe increase the exposure to that. Doesn't have to, it's not going to be strong at first, and hopefully we turn one of those weaknesses into one of our strengths. Reason for the front squat, it's a great movement because it does engage a little bit more core by forcing you to stay upright. With that weight being in front of your center of gravity, it's obviously wanting to pull you forward and you're having to keep a more upright back, which may take some pressure off of the lower back if that's something you're dealing with. But if you're all healthy, it really serves to strengthen the entire core, so the front and the back. I found that it's a really good stimulator. Like the next couple of days I'll be sore from it, and that's mainly because I don't do it as much as I should. So here we are throwing it in. We're doing high reps today, sets of 15 for 135 pounds, mainly because I wanted to get those the reps in there and get that practice and get that form in. But the 135 is, I mean, it's not that great, but it is taxing, and I think it did help to serve to ingrain that technique for the front squat. Following that, we did have our deficit deadlift for the day, which was our main focus for the movement. Again, I like to not keep the deficit so high, probably under 2 inches, definitely under 3 inches. You're probably looking at the 1 to 2 inch mark. Even throwing in a pair of shoes might help. If you normally deadlift in socks or barefoot, throw in a pair of shoes or a heeled shoe. Because I'm doing the front squats, I'll generally want to front squat with some heeled lifting shoes just because it feels nicer on the knees. Takes away that stress from the Achilles joint and the ankle mobility. So with that in mind, I'll just leave those shoes on because it has maybe a 3/4 inch heel lift. That way we're getting a bit more height on the deficit deadlift. And the reason I like the deficit deadlift is, like most accessory movements, I like it because it does increase that range of motion without having to increase the amount of weight we're using. That way we're able to still train the movement, train the motion without having to add more accumulated stress and add more tonnage to the body, because that is one of those things where you have to play around a lot with the weights. And that's why I opted for the higher reps today for the front squats, because again, tempering that intensity, tempering that weight being used with higher reps and more volume, and with that mindset to improve technique and just get used to that movement again. So I'll go ahead and play some clips from the first few sets. That way you can see exactly what's going on there. I'll probably cut out right now. So we're starting off here with the second maximum effort giant set. Again, starting off with the first exercise of the day, which is that front squats. You'll notice I am using those wrist straps to help with that shoulder positioning. During the warm-up sets, I like to not use that and try and get the wrists warmed up, but if the wrists just aren't feeling it, I will definitely throw on those wrist straps to avoid any wrist discomfort. You'll notice too I'm in a slightly elevated heel squat shoe. I like these crazy power RX'd from Adidas. It's not quite of as steep of a heel as it is, say, in the Nike Romaleos or along those lines. So I think it's a nice little middle ground there for heeled squat shoes if you're not wanting to get too big of a heel, as well as getting these shoes for more general lifting purposes, because you can use these for movements other than Olympic style lifts or the squats. So again here, trying to keep the back as upright as possible. So after the first exercise, I kind of take a couple of breaths, and then ideally we're moving straight on to that next movement there, which is that deficit deadlifts for today. So being the second the second set and the second exercise, we have 315 pounds. You notice I am keeping the shoes on. It is heeled, but I am not worried about the angle of the heel or anything like that, because we are trying to elevate the deadlift anyway, so it doesn't really serve any purpose there. I am just standing on some cable spool wooden things that measures around 2 inches in total height. Again, if you were standing on a bumper plate, maybe take off the shoes so you do keep that height deficit to under 2 inches or just around 2 inches. Again, this will come down to your body anthropometry as well. I'm not that tall, so the higher the deficit, the bigger the back. The bigger the deficit will feel relatively for me. Unlike if you're a tall lifter with longer arms, you might be able to get away with a higher deadlift. And again, some things to look out for if your form is breaking down is your knees shoot too far forward with the deficit. They shoot too far out from the deficit, and that's usually a sign that you're too high in your torso or your stomach is getting in the way of your thighs, or vice versa, whichever way that may be. But that the two signs that you might have too big of a deadlift. The other one would be your shoulders dip below your hips, so your butt's higher than your shoulder blades or your shoulders or any part of the arm. That's another sign you might be too high. And the other obvious sign will be the barbell hits your feet. I mean, that's probably the ultimate indicator there. If the barbell hits your feet, you'd obviously don't do that unless you get like a seal bar. And again, I don't see the point in that, especially if you're trying to help this use as an accessory for the deadlift. So we move here over to some kneeling elbow rollouts. You notice a bit of a break in between the two sets there. Ideally, you shorten that breakdown so it is more of a flow of a workout, so you're getting more of a conditioning effort there. But again, with my conditioning as it is, there is a bit more of a break that I would like, and that's probably what's elongating these workouts out more than what is suggested in the program. And we move straight there, which is a nice short break here to just some jumps. 6 reps, nothing crazy, nothing major. And now we move on to our fourth and final set. Again, the front squat just kept the weights the same all the way through from sets 2 to 4. Sets of 15, which is nice. The depth is pretty good. One thing I've noticed personally is that when I do the front squats, my stance width is probably in between hip and shoulder width, not too much wider than that, just because I am playing around with a straighter or more vertical back angle, and that requires a bit more bend in the knee just to keep that weight balanced. Obviously, you don't want to have your torso bent over too much, because that's going to lead to the weight dropping forward. Definitely keep that weight as upright as possible. Drive the elbows up is a cue, and I like to kind of tuck my chin in so the barbell kind of rests right on my throat, and that's a good way to make sure that my torso is staying as upright as possible. Again, using the wrist straps there to help with the stability of the barbell there. I just kind of prefer this over the cross arm, the bodybuilder style front squat rack position, just because it is a little bit more symmetrical than the arms crossed over, as well as you get a little bit more stability with the arms outside of the hands outside of the shoulders, just because you have a wider stance there. And here we have for the fourth and final set of deficit deadlifts, we did increase this weight up to 335 pounds for that set of 5. Probably could have set up the weight change in between the sets here rather than in between each exercise, but again, a little way to cheat myself into getting a little bit more rest in between these movements there. And again, one thing to keep in mind with the deficit deadlifts is to make sure you definitely have the braced abs. I'm opting to not use a belt just because with the more compressed torso positioning, the belt definitely gets in the way and does subtract from the ability to get into somewhat of a lower deficit. Again, your mileage may vary. If you want to use a belt, throw it on there. If not, don't use it. It depends on your personal situation. I don't think it's better or worse. Personal preference here is to do a beltless deficit deadlift just to give me more room in the torso there so that I can get a little bit more of a deficit than usual. And again, all of the regular deadlift tips prevail here. I've been working on trying a new deadlift technique where my shoulders
stay a bit more rounded and more forward than I'm used to. So I'm playing around with that. I used to keep the shoulder blades pulled back as hard as possible. Now I'm trying to let them kind of round forward and get that rounded shoulder positioning while still keeping my upper back as tight as possible, in an effort to reduce that range of motion and hopefully pull more weight in the end there. So again, you'll have a tendency here for the deficit deadlift to bring your weight onto your toes because of that extra angle, and it's going to obviously get exacerbated here with the fact that I am using a heeled squat shoe. So something to keep in mind if that's what you choose to do, but I think you will still have that tendency to dip forward because of that deficit as well, because the weight's pulling you a little bit more forward than it normally would. I've noticed as well with this deficit, I tend to activate a little bit more quads than a regular deadlift just because my form starts to shift the knees a bit more forward than usual. Rather than trying to get a bit more back into it, I'm adding a bit more leg drive into the start of the deadlift there. And again here, we're kind of lagging to get to the kneeling ab wheel rollouts. Again, with the ab movements and conditioning, you're not trying to go to failure, you're not trying to do anything crazy, you just really want to keep that blood pumping. And with the abs, definitely don't go to failure, because definitely with the front squats and the deficit deadlifts, the ab and core is really getting activated and used quite extensively with those two compound movements. It is something to keep an eye out for, because you do want to increase your exposure to the ab and core without having to burn out and go to failure in each set. That way it would not interfere with your other compound movements for the day. And just wrapping up here with some jumps. Ideally, I would have a box, but I don't have a ceiling height or a box, so just jumping in the air.
So we come back to our volume work for the day. I did want to keep this workout relatively short just because of time constraints like usual. So we didn't do any of the extra abs or conditioning movements for the volume work. We just did our two main movements, which is again front squats. We did increase that weight by 145 pounds, but we did reduce the reps to 12 reps. We did that for 2 sets across. We left out that third set again. And then for the deficit deadlifts, we did drop that weight down. We did 275 for sets of 10. High rep deadlifts are really tough, I think, and that's, I think, conditioning coming in definitely. But I'm generally not I haven't been the biggest fan of higher rep deadlift, and by that I'm talking about anything over 5 reps. So I'm considering high reps, just because for the last year or so I've been focusing on 1 rep max and really low reps, 5 reps and under. So this 10 rep work is quite taxing and quite tough, but I, again, like addressing the weaknesses, this is something I should address. So this higher rep work, again, the whole theme of this workout has been a bit more focused on conditioning rather than brute strength, well, brute single rep strength. And I think it's paying off dividends, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been in the past. If I'm thinking about it correctly, I think my conditioning is slowly improving, and this 10 rep deadlift, although tough, it wasn't as tough as it would have been maybe last year or the last 2 years. And then we're wrapping up with the dynamic effort work for the day, which was squats. Again, time cut short, so we did only do 5 reps of that dynamic effort method. So it was 245 with our pink bands, kept to that 1 minute on the minute, every minute on the minute, but for 5 minutes instead of the 10, so we did cut that in half. Again, I like to see me, when the time is short, to just do a lot of everything rather than just focus on, say, max effort, volume, or dynamic. I want to address all 3 just because I think that's the driving force behind the template rather than the exercises you do. I think it's definitely a play on the 3 big things of the giant sets, the rep set scheme, and the combination, that conjugate style where we're doing max effort, volume effort, and dynamic effort. I think those 3 play really well together in driving up some adaptations and driving up some gains. So that wraps it up for the 3rd day of the 7th week. I think it's going well so far. I have been cutting a lot of movements out to keep that time frame under. Again, we'll see how that turns out at the end and see what our overall results are. For that, like usual, I'll leave a playlist right here for the Darkhorse training program playlist so that you can catch up on previous episodes as well as see what my overall final rating and review will be for the program. This has been Selwyn from Wynn Strength, and remember, a better life through strength.